Here's going to be a review of Disney's Snow White, the live-action remake of Disney's own Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from 1937. I saw the movie on its opening Friday night in a non-premium format at 8:30, but there was a decent amount of people in that auditorium, more than I thought there'd be, to be honest. Now, in recent memory, I can't remember a more high-profile film that was getting worse publicity than Disney's Snow White. For something seemingly as wholesome as Disney's version of Snow White, there was just negative coverage basically everywhere you turn for this film, right from the jump, and for various reasons. Unfavorable comments by the film's main star Rachel Zegler, the political views of Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot, general apathy to over a decade now of Disney live-action remakes, and of course those who thought the film just didn't look very good, many claiming that it looked like shit. I'm not much into hate coverage for any film, especially when it's done in clickbait, over-the-top type fashion. I just find that and those kind of conversations to be exhausting, nor do I really give a shit about actors' political values. I just care about the film at hand. While I thought some of the hate for the initial look of the film was typical clickbait over the top, the more that was shown, I was just of the belief that the film just didn't look very good. I also believe a lot of the PR issues for this film could have been avoided if Disney just told its main stars to shut the up. I went into this film with an open mind and was able to steer clear of any reviews, especially the Rotten Tomatoes score, which I always make a priority to avoid before seeing any film. In Disney's Snow White, the titular princess must evade her evil stepmother, the Queen, who has the desire to remain the fairest of them all. You could obviously copy and paste that same synopsis from the 1937 film. However, 2025 Snow White has much deeper story threads than the original film. As this is a remake, the only way to grasp what this film is going for is to understand the original 1937 film. A milestone in film history, as it was the first feature-length animated film from Walt Disney, leading to a legacy of unparalleled family entertainment. But just as important, it was the first animated film ever. Total mic drop moment. There's many charming elements to the original Snow White, with the characters, besides the prince, the songs, effectively dark moments as only Golden Age Disney could do.
Bring back her heart in this.
But most impressively, sensational artistry. The fluidity of movement, background paintings, designs of Snow White, the Queen, or the Witch, superb. You gotta imagine being back in 1937 to understand the technical and storytelling significance of this film. But the storytelling is quite dated though, notably in its pacing, as there's entire 10-minute segments just dedicated to dwarf shenanigans. And of course, that love story. Not good. In modern day, if you were to write a love story in similar fashion that was as thin and shallow as the one between Snow White and the Prince, your film would rightfully be called some old bullshit. Understanding that, much of the shallowness and lack of story depth wouldn't work for a modern day interpretation. I thought the basic world building elements added to the story here were okay. Most of them a necessity, as the original film had a very thin pool of characters. While there's a lot of world building additions to flesh out the film's story, the core story is what you'd expect from any Snow White adaptation, specifically Disney's. The trailers showcase key scenes that you'd expect to see from a Disney Snow White remake, but there were a few scenes that I was surprised they kept in, as I figured they wouldn't be considered politically modern, would be the best way to describe it. But when this movie actually did fully embrace the spirit of the original film, wow, was it surprisingly fun to watch. With two sequences specifically, in Hi-Ho and Whistle While You Work. I'm not gonna lie, I thought the Hi-Ho scene was spectacular. That's an iconic scene in Disney animated history, the introduction to the dwarves. But there was a grandness and scale to how it was done here, only possible in live action, or CG I guess. And there was a lot of great additional lyrics and fun to it, that made it an absolute showstopper, like the Be Our Guest scene from 2017's Beauty and the Beast. It made me really want to ride again the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train roller coaster at Magic Kingdom. On that subject, I liked what they did with the dwarfs here. They all obviously played to their iconic personalities. The slight weirdness of their designs makes sense with the explanation they give with the nature of these characters. And the character art for Dopey was probably the film's best addition. It was a real surprise. The dwarfs' inclusion in the Whistle While You Work song was a great creative change on the part of the filmmakers that made it a real friendship bonding moment between Snow White and her new friends, all in a very catchy musical segment. Rachel Zegler's Snow White doesn't embody much of anything from the original version, and I get it, as that original personality and voice of Snow White would come across as odd in the new school version, but that doesn't mean Zegler is bad here. She gives a good performance as an updated Snow White. The main thing that annoyed me was the backstory change for why she's called Snow White. Should have been called Snow Brown, to be honest. These days, it's not a Disney live-action remake without some diversity changes for shit and giggles, I guess. The best thing about Gal Gadot's Evil Queen was the wardrobe. All of those outfits and jewelry were 10 out of 10s. The performance embodied enough of the wickedness needed to carry on the spirit of Disney's OG film baddie.
The people need some kindness.
You know, I really don't remember you being this opinionated.
For as much controversy as the two stars were in during the promotion of this film, their performances were more than fine. When the film's scenes and performances were embodying the spirit of the original, the film was absolutely at its best. Of course, the movie, for better and worse, can't help but put its own modern imprint in more than one way. The main element added here is Snow White and a group's rebellion against the Queen's tyranny. This story, to some degree, was invoking the whole girl power tropes that I know a lot of audiences are now cringing at. Not all of the scenes that focus on this were all that great. I thought the initial spotlight scenes of this stuff in the woods were actually quite poor. But if I'm being honest, I didn't think this element of the film was terrible. I was initially worried once it was introduced that it would become the main focus of the film, but it's surprisingly balanced out in some clever ways with the main plot points of the original, some of which actually end up being more faithful to the original Brothers Grimm tale. I think the best thing about the whole rebellion aspect to the story was ditching the OG character known as the Prince. One of the worst paper-thin characters to play an important role in a Disney film, but with the original film story simplicity, you just kind of go with it. But even by those standards, it's beyond lackluster. Now, I wasn't aware what the romance angle was going to be in this film, if there was even going to be one, based on the trailers. God forbid any modern Disney movie showcase any kind of real romance. However, in this film, it comes in the form of a young man leading a rebellion against the Queen. There's enough development and chemistry between him and Snow White to make this angle work okay, and ultimately is a change for the better. I even didn't mind the original songs added here. Usually, these are the worst parts of these remakes, but in totality, these songs were solid. A few I thought were really good. Not surprised, though, they took out the Someday My Prince Will Come song. A few creative song changes, though, like removing the With a Smile in the song scene, made for a weird transition in between the dark forest scene and her coming across the dwarf cottage. But I think more surprisingly worked here than didn't. I love the scenes that really felt like a remake of Snow White, which there weren't many, but they were pretty good when they were there. The modern updates here could have been a lot cringy. Not all of them are great, but they're not overpowering. It, I'll just say it. I mostly enjoyed the film, so yeah, I'll say I liked it. Sometimes you just gotta be honest, and I don't know what kind of reviews this movie is getting right now. Maybe I look like a total idiot. I didn't really have much of a rooting interest either way in this film, but what I saw, I mostly enjoyed. For me, this is just an instance where PR teams and media strategists just got to do their job in telling the stars to keep their mouths shut for the betterment of the film's release. There's obviously a lot of people rooting for this movie to stink, and it won't be for everyone, especially if you're already apathetic to Disney live-action remakes already. But if you go in with an open mind, I think there's some enjoyment to be had. With this movie out of the way, the only pre-modern day Disney princess not to have a remake is Pocahontas. Now, if you want some real controversy, let Disney try to tack on that story. I double dare them. So that'll do it for this review of Disney's Snow White. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.
Did I frighten you?